Good afternoon. I'm Tim Anaya, Vice President of Marketing and Communications for the Pacific Research Institute, and we'd like to welcome you to our 6th annual California Ideas in Action Conference. We're so thrilled to have you all here today for what we think is going to be a day of hope for everyone who, like we do, believe in conservative and free market ideas. So we're thrilled to have you here. Now, I want to say up front, you may have noticed when you were coming in, all the streets were cleaned, all the sidewalks were cleaned and swept. There are no homeless people anywhere. Well, I don't have that much magic in the city of Sacramento. They did that for Leonardo DiCaprio filming a movie in town, and we didn't want to break a surprise, but maybe later Leo will come and lecture to us about all the emissions he spews from his jet and other wonderful things. Well, to kick off our day, I'd like to introduce, as PRI this year, we're celebrating our 45th anniversary, and that's worthy of applause. Let's applaud 45 years of PRI. And to kick off our day, I'd like to bring up PRI's President, CEO, and Thomas W. Smith Fellow in Healthcare Policy, Sally Pipes.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Tim, for that kind introduction. We're going to be proceeding from now, so please enjoy your lunch, have your salad, and then they will be coming along to bring you your chicken, your famous chicken lunch. So please, as a policy analyst, I'm used to talking when no one's listening and you'll be eating. But anyway, so good afternoon. As Tim said, I'm Sally Pipes, President, CEO, and Thomas W. Smith Fellow in Healthcare Policy here at PRI, and I've been in the job since October 1st, 1991. So I was 12 when I started. So on behalf of everyone at PRI, I'm pleased to welcome you to, as Tim said, our 6th annual conference and the 45th anniversary of PRI. We're happy to be back again this year, planting the free market flag right across the street from the state capitol, which I guess is under a renovation right now. So here we are. And I want to acknowledge the generosity of the event sponsors and supporters for enabling us to host all of you today. When we started 6 years ago, we probably had 15 or 20 people, and now we have a room which we've actually outgrown. We have a tremendous number of people. I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Steve Hilton, more formally in a few minutes, but I wanted to give a special shout out to Katie Lynn and her Third Thursday group. They have a few tables here. I got to know Katie even better, not just from Third Thursday, but from being in Budapest last September, where she is originally from Hungary and knows everything about Budapest. It was wonderful. And she just told me that Steve Hilton's parents were from Budapest as well. So we've got two famous Hungarians right here in our midst. So congratulations, and thank you, Katie, again, and I hope you'll come back with your group again next spring when we do this again. I want to give a special shout out to the PRI team, Tim and I, particularly, who's done a fabulous job at pulling this all together. So congratulations, Tim, and Laura Dannerbeck and Emily and Devin Mirsky have done a great job, and Ben Smithwick, and Rowena and I are just in the background. So thank you all for making this a wonderful day. From where you're sitting today, things may seem pretty bleak for those of us who believe in free markets and free people. We're here today to inspire you about market-based change that is possible in California. Every day, our PRI scholars are at the forefront of the great policy debates here in Sacramento and across the country. In our books and studies, media commentaries and interviews, podcasts, videos, and movies and events like this, PRI's team offers what's often missing in the policy discussion on TV and in the halls of power. There is hope for a free market future. We have to be optimistic. And that's what you're going to see on the stage today, starting with our keynote speaker, Steve Hilton. Steve will share with us his optimistic outlook for making conservative public policy victories despite California's blue dominance. Since it's Valentine's Day tomorrow, we thought we should bring a Valentine for Governor Newsom and his lawmakers. But what do you get for people who already have everything they could want from the state? After all, if all the politicians don't have something they want for us, they can mandate it, try to make it through eminent domain, and spend our tax dollars to go out and buy it for you. They are certainly experts at spending our money, and particularly with the state facing a $68 billion deficit. Then it hit me. When you read about Governor Newsom doubling down on taxpayer-funded health care for the undocumented, that will bring the cost of Medi-Cal this year to $4 billion. Or legislative liberals continuing to push a single-payer healthcare scheme for the state, which would cost double the state budget, $400 billion from roughly $250 billion. Assemblyman Ash Kalra, who I spend my time running down his policies, he once again last week introduced AB 2200, his single-payer bill. So we'll see in this election year whether it can move forward, but his time in 2021 and 2022, it didn't go anywhere, and I hope it's not going to go anywhere this year. Or the Newsom administration investing more than $10 billion in its costly Project Home Key program that PRI's research has shown is ineffective and not solving the homeless crisis. As you remember, last year we had Michael Schellenberger, a friend of Ken's and a friend of PRI's, point out a lot of the, not just the problems, but the solutions for the homeless crisis. Or the taxpayer-funded reparations, which is what you'll learn in a few minutes, will bankrupt the state, in addition to all these other programs that are going to bankrupt the state. It's clear what the politicians don't have, and that's free market ideas. So we're here today with candy-coated market-based solutions presented in a virtual heart-shaped box. Remember, the conversation hearts that we used to get as kids. Remember those little sayings on the back, those little candies? PRI's conversation hearts for Valentine's Day are a little bit different. Instead of saying, "Be my Valentine," or "Way to go," ours say, "Let's fix this and do your job." Whether this is your first time attending or if you're a conference regular, we are so pleased to have you here today at what in this most important time in our political future. Nationally, we're fast approaching what looks like a rematch between current President Joe Biden and past President Donald Trump. And here in California, candidates for the U.S. Senate are crisscrossing our state in advance of that March 5th primary election. Given that we're in the middle of election season, this year's conference focuses on what we call 5 issues for 2024. These are issues that the voters have identified in a survey, and they are their top concerns: crime, housing and homelessness. Well, they got rid of the homeless right for Leonardo DiCaprio. Why can't they get rid of it for the rest of us? Government debt and spending, education and student achievement, and the environment and energy regulations. On each of these issues, Sacramento and Washington, D.C. are failing to help those who say they are fighting for the vulnerable and the working class. It would be easy for us to present speakers who would do a lot of complaining. We hear that all the time. We already know that California is a state of problems. We see it and live it every single day. PRI is optimistic about our state's comeback. Rather than complain, we're bringing to you the state's leading thinkers today, frontline policymakers and real-life change makers who will share their firsthand experiences on how we can turn this beautiful state around. The speakers you will hear from today are the living embodiment of PRI's motto, policy entrepreneurs putting ideas into action. I hope you'll be inspired by what you learned today, and you can go back and advocate for change at home and join our speakers in putting ideas into action in your own communities. Now, to begin our conference, I'd like to introduce Steve Hilton. You may remember Steve from his program, The Next Revolution, on Fox News, or Deep Dive on Fox Nation, which Rowena and I were both guests on when they were still around. Steve is still a Fox News contributor and the founder and CEO of a new group called Golden Together. Golden Together fights for bipartisan policy changes such as CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, and reform, which we had a major release on that a couple of years ago with our big chart. Before moving to the U.S., Steve was a top advisor to then Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron. He's a longtime friend of PRI, has been graciously spoken at many of our events. And his wife is even more famous, Rachel Whetstone, because she is the granddaughter of our founder, PRI's founder, Sir Anthony Fisher. So we're so pleased to have you here today to inspire us all. So I ask you, please give a warm Sacramento welcome to Steve Hilton.
Hát köszönöm, Sally, nagyon örülök itt lenni. Nem is tudtam, hogy magyarok vannak itt. Do I keep going in Hungarian, or is that not all of you? All of you speak Hungarian, okay. Egészséget, mindenkinek egészséget, nagyon köszönöm. Úgyhogy, hát angolul folyok, jó, akkor. English, I think we've agreed, it's going to be English from now. It's a beautiful language, Hungarian, I mean, come on. Thank you for that Valentine's kiss, Sally. Always wonderful to be here. I do feel at home every time I come to a wonderful event with PRI. As you said, PRI is in the family. I'm so proud to be here to support you and all your incredible work. It's a fantastic organization. Thank you all for being here to support PRI. Just before, I just want to say one thing. I know I was just rushing out a little bit earlier, and I can see there's a look of slight anxiety on the face of a couple of people that I rushed out of the lobby of the hotel just a few minutes before this event began. And I can see, well, hang on a second, aren't you our speaker? Why are you rushing out of the building? And so to any of you who had that thought, I was just going to get my cup of tea from Starbucks. And so I just have to say, look, I now stand before you as a proud American, as of 3.5 years ago, just about. But, you know, old habits die hard, so you got to have your cup of tea. And by the way, do you see the latest news on tea? The Houthis, if I can make that terrible joke, are now intercepting tea supplies. So there's now a tea crisis looming in England because the tea supplies through the Red Sea being interrupted. That's the least of the problems, of course, in that region. But it just struck me this morning when I heard that on the news. And again, you know, I mean, if only Leo were here to accept our appreciation of his role in cleaning up the city. And of course, the other great character that has helped clean up another great city here in California, San Francisco, Xi Jinping. Thank you, Xi Jinping. Because, of course, it was for him that they managed to clean up San Francisco a few weeks ago. I mean, isn't it just embarrassing that is what we've come to? That they can do it for movie stars and communist dictators, but not for the people who actually pay the taxes for these people to do their jobs. Outrageous. So Sally mentioned that the state capitol is undergoing renovation. That's an interesting word. I think I'd like to replace renovation with a more aggressive word, shall we say, in terms of what we need here in California. It seems to me we don't need renovation. We need revolution. That's what we need in California. I don't know if any of you caught my show, The Next Revolution. Anyone watch The Next Revolution? How about we make the next revolution the California Revolution? That's what we need. That's what I want to talk about today. And I want to give you a sense of what might actually be possible. I know this is not a political event. I'm not going to get too into politics, but in the end, policies are enacted through the political system. And so in the end, we do have to look at that as we want to advance the revolution that we want to see along the lines that Sally outlined, free market policies that free people to be who they want to be. And that, of course, is the essence of California. I mean, even before we moved here as a family back in 2012, so nearly 12 years we've been here, I remember back in the day working, as Sally mentioned, for Prime Minister David Cameron, leading our policy domestic policy reforms there in 10 Downing Street, the media in the UK used to mock me. I mean, that's nothing unusual there. But the media used to mock me for the way I was inspired by the idea of what California would be, even before I'd ever come to California. The idea of California was such an inspiring and positive idea. And we all know what we mean by that. California as the beacon of innovation and energy and dynamism and optimism, everything good in the world. There's this amazing phrase that I came across as now I've got more involved myself in the fight to save California. That's, by the way, one of the reasons. I know people ask me a lot of the time, why did you stop doing your show? We just had that conversation just here at the table. And actually, the direct answer to that is I love this state. I love the state that we've made our home, and I want to fight to save California. I'm getting involved in that fight. Thank you very much, and you'll hear more about that in the months and years to come. And in that fight, you can't actually. There's a rule that means that as a host of a show, you're not allowed to speak at political events and so on. So I wanted to free myself from that constraint. I'm still with Fox, as you heard, but I'm all in for saving California. Thank you. And as I was engaging in that, getting deeper and deeper into both the policy issues, but also reading about California's great history, there's this phrase that I came across in a book that's so beautiful. And to me, it captures everything we should all be fighting for. Here's the phrase. California means to America what America means to the world. And I just thought that's such a special phrase. It's so right. But of course, it's gone so wrong. Both parts of that actually have gone so wrong. If we think about America standing in the world today and where it should be, we know what's gone wrong there. But of course, California doesn't mean that anymore. We know what it should be when it says California means to America what America means to the world. A beacon of hope and inspiration and energy and optimism and dynamism and all those things that I just spoke about. But we're not that anymore. I mean, even in the 10 plus years I've been here, it's changed so badly. And you go back to Europe, as we often do, and when we first moved here, people would say, you used to tell them where you live, and they say, oh, California, it's amazing. And everyone would have some kind of reaction or reference point, but it would always be positive. If you told them you live in Silicon Valley and it were young people saying, oh, amazing technology, Google, whatever, they may mention the weather or the beautiful scenery or Yosemite or Disneyland. Always something positive when you mentioned that you live in California. And now it's the exact opposite. And they literally look, and I'm sure you've had the same experiences. Oh my, are you safe? Is it okay? Is it as bad as they say? How terrible that that's what's happened to our beautiful, incredible state. We mustn't allow that to become the future of California. Yes, it's been the recent past, but we can affect the future. We need that California revolution. And when we look at what needs to change, I mean, I'll be happy to take some questions when I've finished, and you may have specific areas that you want me to dive into. And I'm very happy to be amongst policy people because I don't often get the chance to get really into the details of policy. But the thing is that when you ask the question, what needs to change in California? What is the California revolution? The short answer is everything. Everything. There's not a single thing that's going right. I mean, here's a simple way that I find of capturing it, and it's not an exaggeration. If you look at the league tables on different issues within America, right now, California is pretty much on every issue. We are bottom of every list that you want to be the top of, and top of every list you want to be the bottom of. And that's not near the top or near the bottom. It is literally the case that we have the highest taxes of any state and the worst poverty at the same time, which is pretty much a genius accomplishment if you think about it. In education, we have the highest spending per student of any state and the lowest literacy. The lowest, not just 46th out of 50 or 50th out of 50 on literacy. We spend the most and get the worst outcomes. You look at housing that Sally mentioned, something I'm working on, as she said, very directly now. We have the highest housing costs in America and the lowest home ownership. The lowest home ownership. What happened to the California dream? That idea that you come here and you make your way in the world and you follow your dreams and you own a home and build a business and build your future and raise your family. That's all gone for people. The idea of owning your own home is gone for most people in California. That is a crime against the future in our generation that just cannot get on the housing ladder. You look at everything else. You look at the one I couldn't believe the other day, business climate, right? It's actually, it's worse than the worst. We're not just the 50th out of 50 in terms of business climate. We're actually worse than that because we're worse even than Puerto Rico. So, I mean, I could go on. I don't want to depress you, but like, that's the point. Everything needs to change. We do really need a revolution. And so the question is, how do we get there? And here I want to just lay out a couple of the theories that I've heard from other people as I've been engaging more and more in this. And I want to show you why they're wrong, but how we can get to where we need to go. So people sometimes say, look, forget about it. You're never going to win a majority for the kind of reforms that are needed. What you can do is win ballot initiatives. So that's a way that we can get the kind of changes that we need. And yes, that is true. If you look at ballot initiatives over the last few years, it is true that many have gone in a, you could say, conservative direction on all sorts of issues, on crime and on racial preferences and on the regulation of gig workers, etc. That's true. But what happens after the ballot initiative where the right side of the argument wins? Those people over there, am I pointing the right way? They say, well, these people, by the way, who never stop lecturing us about saving our democracy. These people see the people vote down an initiative or vote for an initiative for positive change. Oh, we don't like that. We're going to reverse it in the legislature. And that's what they always do. So there's no permanent victory through a ballot initiative. They're doing that right now, aren't they? On racial preferences. They didn't like the outcome of the ballot initiative, so now they're trying to introduce legislation to undermine it. And you see that on every single issue. So while it's, of course, true that we should try and make progress on these ballot initiatives, and very encouraging to see the progress on the one right now to overturn Prop 47. That looks like that's going to qualify, and that's fantastic. But who believes that they're going to just leave it at that? So that is always just a partial response, the ballot initiatives. The second thing you hear a lot, particularly I have to say from the business community, particularly in this town, is, well, you're not going to get Republicans who really believe in positive change, free markets, and so on. So we need to support moderate Democrats, pro-business Democrats. And so you've seen a lot of money, frankly, move from supporting Republican candidates to supporting moderate Democrats. And especially when you combine that with the top two system in California, it has led to a situation where what do you have now? In the legislature, you have 62 Democrats, in the Assembly, 18 Republicans. In the Senate, 32 Democrats, 8 Republicans, a supermajority. And so where has it got us, this idea that the answer is to support moderate Democrats? It's led to the most far-left policies anywhere in America with the results that we just see. So that doesn't work either. So here's my argument to you today. There's only one way to bring about that California revolution, to save the state we love. And that is to elect people at every level who really do believe in the kinds of changes that we need to see. That's the only answer. And when people say, forget about it, that'll never happen, it's always going to be this deep blue state. I'll give you a couple of facts and a couple of grounds for optimism, if I may. Number one, when people tell you there's no chance because it's such a deep blue state, well, I had a look at the numbers. And if you look at statewide elections, since the last time a Democrat didn't win, the last time Republican won a statewide election in the state, 2006. If you average out the Republican vote in all statewide elections since then, in all the statewide offices, the vote is 41.8%, which is a lot higher than some people think. It's not. I'm not saying it's great, but it's not nearly as far behind as some people think. And then you look at the when you dive into the details of how people think politically in this state, you look at the fact that actually on those ballot initiatives, the Conservative view prevailed. That tells you something about where people are at. You look at polling data right now where the pollsters ask, is California going in the right direction or the wrong direction? There's a majority who say wrong direction. There's a majority who think we need to change direction. A majority. You look at individual policy issues on crime and education and taxes. The Conservative position is more popular. You look at the demographics of our state. The largest group in California now, Latinos, 40%. Here's the breakdown: 40% Latino, 35% white, 15% Asian, 5% black, 5% Native Americans and others. So 40%, largest group, Latinos. You see what's happening across the country, running away from the Democratic Party. In Florida, in Texas. Not yet here, enough, but there's some potential there. So when you add all that together and you look at what's happening, and I see this every day now, working at Golden together on the policy ideas that we're advancing to try and bring about that California revolution. You talk to people, they're absolutely fed up with what's going on. They know we need change. They know we need change. The ingredients are there. I'm very, very confident we can do it. But we have to be focused and professional and united and clear about how we're going to get there. But I think if we do all that, and that's what I'm working on now, that is my focus. I hear all the time people say, oh, why are you bothering with California? Just move. I said, why? Why should we move? Why should we move? Because they've gone off to the far left. No, they're the ones that we need to move out of office. That's what needs to happen. We're staying. I'm staying. I'm fighting for that California revolution to make this state, this beautiful state that I know we will love so very much, golden, truly golden, together. Thank you very much. So I promise not to go on and on so that we can have time for some questions.
Questions, yes. So,
Which is always my favorite part, so really want to hear from you. Thank you.
One of the things that's always bothered me about the ballot initiative process is the Attorney General gets to do the wording.
Yes.
Got the gas tax repeal, become the bridge and road safety.
Is that microphone on? Can you hear at the back? No.
Sorry, there we go, sorry. One of the things that's always bothered me about the initiative process is the fact that the Attorney General gets to choose the wording, which is how the gas tax repeal
Yes.
becomes the bridge and road safety initiative. Wouldn't trying to get that removed from the Attorney General become kind of a meta reform? So if you reform that piece of the ballot initiative, it would enable all kinds of other reforms on the ballot initiative.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, funnily enough, we've just been through that process. And if anyone asks me about housing, I can tell you what we're working on. Can I just come out of the room there and show you my very exciting T-shirt, if I may? There you are. There. So probably a little hard to see at the back there. I have a T-shirt called with words on it, Cal Homes Now. And if you go to calhomesnow.com, you can see the initiative that I'm working on, which is to, I shouldn't have said right now, right? Because you've got to listen to what I'm saying. But after the event, Cal Homes Now, it's an initiative to reform CEQA, as Sally mentioned, to eliminate the private right of action under CEQA, which for those of you who followed that issue is the number one reason that we have these endless, ridiculous lawsuits that block pretty much anything from being built. So it's a very radical change, actually. That's our initiative. And when we anticipated from the Attorney General exactly what you're describing there, which is a really unfavorable title and summary, to our surprise, actually, it was pretty neutral on this occasion. So the title and summary we've been given for our ballot initiative, for which we're out collecting signatures now, it's called the California Home Ownership Affordability Act. On our one, we actually didn't get a bad result. But you're completely right. I mean, the most egregious example was Prop 47, wasn't it? Prop 47, which legalized theft up to $950 a day, now in the process of, we hope, being overturned. I think that was literally described as the Safer Neighborhoods and Schools Act or something sort of outrageous. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Orwellian. So, I completely agree. We do need, it's ridiculous that power to define these initiatives is in the hands of a partisan elected official. And we have a perfect alternative, which is the Legislative Analyst's Office, which actually is genuinely independent. I mean, the Legislative Analyst's Office, it really does do good work of putting out reports. For example, they recently, to Sally mentioned the deficit, the $68 billion deficit, and and Gavin Newsom in his budget said, oh, no, it's not 68 billion, it's only 30 billion or whatever, as if that's good. But still, and the LAO, the Legislative Analyst's Office, absolutely aggressively pushed back on that. And said, no, he's wrong, the governor's wrong. So we have an existing trusted institution that is genuinely independent, that could and should write those ballot initiatives. I absolutely agree with that as a common sense reform.
Hello, I just want to say that I'm waiting for somebody to sponsor an initiative to get rid of the top two jungle primaries.
Yeah.
When's somebody going to do that? I can't believe that Charlie Munger and that Rhino did that thing in the first place. It's just absurd.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing is, it's incredibly frustrating to me, because if you look at those numbers in the legislature that I spoke about, 62 to 18 in the Assembly, 32 to 8 in the Senate, I think the top two system is largely responsible for that, because that's been the dynamic that you've seen, going back to my earlier point about business, which is when you get that, and you combine it with the districting that's gone on, and then you do end up with a situation where it looks as if you're going to have, you've got two Democrats, one's backed by the unions, and the other one isn't, and then you've got a Republican that's further behind, and then you can see why the argument develops for business organizations who actually agree with the policy positions of the Republican, but they look at the top two and they say, wow, the Republican's not going to even get in the top two, so why waste my money? I should support the least bad Democrat. That's been the dynamic. But the consequence of that is not only that you end up with these races where you end up with a Democrat for guaranteed to win, and this massive lopsided situation in the legislature. And by the way, just remember what the data that I just gave you about statewide. So if you just take statewide voting as a proxy for public opinion across California, okay, then the number is in the elections over the last 10 years or so, 41.8% for Republicans. Let's just call it 40, right? 60-40. Let's just use that, and that's a very stable number if you look at statewide elections. So roughly 40% of voters in California vote Republican. And yet in the legislature, that balance is like 80-20. So this top two system has caused a real distortion. And it's the opposite of what it was promised. They promised that this would lead to moderate outcomes. Because if you have a top two, then the candidates appeal to the more of a center ground. The exact opposite has happened. We've gone off to the far left. It's actually kind of turbocharged extremism. So I do agree with you. How we get there, I mean, you're right. It was created through an initiative, so it's a constitutional one. So I guess we need another initiative to overturn it. But I do agree with you.
We seem to have a big problem in the state and the country where we're fostering welfare's top 1%, who are the career politicians, and how we need to have something where if you get to the top of your state, you shouldn't be able to go back down to the local level. If you get to Congress, you shouldn't be able to go back down to the local level. So you always see the same names keep coming up that used, like Kevin De Leon. But he's a LA city councilman now, making $225,000 a year when he was already in our state senate. Sheila Kuehl's another one where she is a
Oh my goodness, I know.
making tons of money too, and they never leave. They never leave because they've made such a lovely life. And I think, you know, something like grassroots like that, once you get up there, you can't come back down here, needs to be something that we need to try to do, because these people never leave.
They never leave. I totally agree. And you can't winkle. And also, by the way, with the queues, and then the other one is there's Janice Hahn, right? And in LA, I was just talking to Alex Villanueva, who's running for LA for the Board of Supervisors in LA County. By the way, that's an amazing thing. LA County. No one pays attention to this race. 10 million people. It's the biggest in the country. The budget is like $70 billion, and it's 5 people. 5 people running it. So there's a massive problem of I just think the lack of accountability over all levels of government in California. We're the 5th largest economy in the world, and all this money is spent by these people who are often anonymous, and no one even. Janice Hahn, that family seems to me, you know, from what I learned from Alex Villanueva, basically inherited the position. Like we don't, you know, it's like some kind of hereditary monarchy system in California. And it's just crazy, and they've been for year after year after year. I couldn't agree more. So one thing may be to cut the pay. How about that? Yeah. Cut the pay. I mean, this is the thing, by the way, slight digression, but you hear all the time, and this is an argument familiar to me from the UK as well, which is, well, if you're in public service, not just the politicians, but also government, you know, public sector workers and so on, well, you know, the reason that you have to give them these incredibly generous pensions, totally unimaginable for regular people, and of course here in California, it's not just the pensions, it's also the healthcare, luxury healthcare. It's OPEB, isn't it? Other post-employment benefits in the budget for the policy nerds following along. So huge, huge costs, way in excess of anything available in any other state, including neighboring democratic states. So the argument used to be, well, they're making such a sacrifice to give their lives to public service, that we need to give them generous pensions and generous vacation and all this stuff. But then you look at what they're earning now. I mean, these are just astronomical salaries. I just was looking at, we live in the Bay Area, it's in some local council that, not even a senior position, it was like $340,000 or something. You know, and you just look at that across the state and at all these levels of government. So I think, and so no wonder they don't want to leave. You can't ever get them out. And then they get the support of the political machine and the unions, and then it's totally, you know, the corruption is there, isn't it? As we all know very well, you know, they give generous pensions and healthcare and deals to the unions, and then they get their, not just the donations, but also the organizing muscle, you know, the door knocking and all the rest of it is totally corrupt, totally corrupt. So I think just working on every aspect of that, cutting what they're paid, is absolutely vital. It's a great, great question, because so many of these things, we can talk about the policy that we need to see, but in the end, you've got, and actually just like your question about top 2, actually, in a way, these, if you could call it, these structural defects of our system are so important to address, because they underlie why we have all these terrible policies.
First and foremost, it's a pleasure to meet you and to be here. One observation that I oftentimes, well, actually, let me back up. When I think of California, I think of California as a South. We have people from all kinds of backgrounds in California. Oftentimes, when I participate in different conservative events, I find that there's not too much diversity. How do we engage the 60% in California, whether it's our next generation or different communities, to get involved and to see the vision?
Yeah, it's a really important question. It goes to the heart of how we achieve that California revolution. And I think that my answer to it, I'll give a general answer, then we can look at some of the details. I think that as we go out there and we try and, but remember that, you know, going back to the numbers, again, stressing this is, you know, not a political event, but you've got, you know, okay, how do you get that extra 10%? How do we get to the point where there's a majority for the kinds of policies that we support here? And we can start to implement it at the state level and eventually in the legislature. And the answer is you need to persuade people, right? By definition, you have to persuade people who are currently either not voting or voting for someone else to vote for you. That's the math. If you get from 40 to 50, if it's 60-40 right now, you've got to get from 40 to 50, an extra 10%. How do you do that? And I think that there's a very important lesson for how all of us make our arguments, which is you've got to, just as in life, if you're trying to persuade someone, you try and you're nice to them, and you try and be, you win them over, and you try and find points of connection. You don't yell at them. And so I think it's very important that as we go forward in this effort, there's two words that sound very simplistic, actually, when I will say them. You'll think, oh, that's very obvious. But I find myself saying them over and over again. And in fact, I used to, for those of you who watch the show regularly, I used to have a segment on my show titled with these following words: positive and practical. Positive and practical. And it sounds so silly, of course, things should be positive and practical. But actually, a lot of the time in political conversation, we don't hit those 2 points. And you're constantly criticizing the other side and yelling at them and screaming. And, there's a lot to criticize, of course, in California. But that doesn't necessarily win people over. And so you've got to be positive. Here's what we're going to do. And then you've got to be practical. Do it in not ideological, not theoretical, like specific things. Because most people aren't interested in politics. They don't follow it. They don't care. They just want to know what's going to happen. Positive and practical. So I think that is, and so that's why, for example, in all the work that we're doing, and I'll give you now a specific example, that's why actually the first issue that I wanted to focus on in Golden Together was housing and home ownership, actually, which is, I think, a more positive way of putting it, which is, it's because it's an issue that actually isn't particularly ideological or partisan. It's exactly the kind of issue to win people over. Because who's most fed up with the current housing crisis, the situation on the housing? It is younger people who can't get on the housing ladder. And they're literally saying, I can't even raise a family in California anymore because it's so astronomically expensive. I'm never going to be able to afford a home. So they're leaving in their droves. This is what, housing costs are the number one reason people are leaving our state. So we joke about it, and you saw Gavin Newsom and DeSantis in that debate, DeSantis going on about people leaving and U-Hauls, and we see all that rhetoric. But actually underneath that, the number one reason people are leaving are housing costs. Housing costs affect everyone. It's not just the people who can't get on the housing ladder. It's not just about owning, it's about renting. Rents are so astronomical. Why? Because we just don't have enough housing built. There's not enough homes that were built. We used to build like crazy in California. You go back to the 50s and the 60s, that was what it was all about, just expansion. And so I could talk all afternoon about housing. I'm not going to do that, but I'm just using it as an example of something that brings people in. Who cares about that issue? Younger people, Latinos, right? The California dream. You want to raise a family. You don't want to be told you're going to have to live in some apartment building. This is California, not North Korea. You want a home with a garden, enjoy the weather with your kids, right? That's the California dream. And so that's a really specific, positive, practical point of connection. We want you to be able to own your own home. And here's how we're going to do it. So I think that in a way, it takes the politics out of it. It's just very pragmatic, common sense things, not ideological, just a way of bringing people in so we get a majority for the kind of change we want to see.
We have time for one more question. Hi. As an original native Sacramento, I've seen a lot of changes. If you try to put the lipstick on the page, to look in a lot of areas. But the idea of housing, one of the things that I've witnessed is the lack of infrastructure. If you try to build houses, they've got not enough water, no sewers. Folsom's a good example. The other thing that I need you to address is they're building affordable housing, but they're making the HOA dues so expensive. That's impacting their monthly budget.
You see, you're going to force me, aren't you, to talk about housing? No, you're quite right. It's such a big issue. Let me try and do it quickly. So again, completely correct. And that's one of the, so let's just take it in order. Infrastructure, completely correct. That's why our initiative, the California Home Ownership Affordability Act, it's got two components and it addresses the things you raised. The first component is to eliminate the private right of action under CEQA. I mentioned this earlier, but I just want to convey to you who maybe haven't studied it closely what that means and why it's so important. CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, passed in 1970, signed by Governor Reagan. It was meant for big polluting factories and things that we'd all agree should be protected. It didn't cover housing. And over the years, the courts, not the politicians, not the legislature, anyone elected, the courts have extended it in two ways. First, they extended it to cover absolutely everything that moves, that you need to get built. And secondly, they granted this private right of action. So anyone can bring a lawsuit to block anything, basically. And so if you look now at CEQA lawsuits, 70% of them are used to block housing. 70% of all CEQA lawsuits. And then you look at the scale of what that's impacting. Right now, there's here's the number that will just stagger you when you hear it. This is the number of housing units across the state of California that are currently blocked by CEQA lawsuits. The stock, not in 1 year, just the stock of where we've got to. It's over 1 million. Over 1 million housing units blocked by CEQA lawsuits. Just in 1 year, in 2020, I think was the last year we had the data, maybe 2021. That year, we built just over 100,000 housing units in California. 48,000 were blocked by CEQA lawsuits. That's just in 1 year. So it's a massive issue. And remember, these housing units, they've already been approved. They've been approved by local communities. They've gone through zoning. They're actually already compliant with CEQA. So these are totally bogus lawsuits. And guess who brings them? Most of these lawsuits are filed by our friends, the unions. The unions file the lawsuits. They make up some fake name like Concerned Environmentalists of Sacramento, or whatever it may be, and they use these lawsuits to extract leverage. So they demand, higher wages. They call it prevailing wage. They demand union workers be employed for everything. They call it skilled and trained. And so this is what's going on. And actually, the more that you dig into everything in California, you realize who really runs California are the unions. And that's not just the public sector unions in terms of teachers and schools, but actually even in the private sector as well. It reminds me of, now big digression. Sorry, I'm going on and on. I moved here from the UK, and this reminds me of the 1970s Britain before Margaret Thatcher's union reforms. It's absolutely staggering to me how we've allowed such union dominance of everything that moves in California. So that's what's going on. So our initiative eliminates that private right of action. And to your question directly, it's not just for housing, but for infrastructure to support housing. So because it's not just the house, they often use these lawsuits to block the water and the energy and so on as a proxy. They don't want to look as if they're directly blocking housing, because that's a bad look. So they block the infrastructure and on bogus environmental grounds. So our initiative addresses that directly. It removes the private right of action under CEQA for housing and the infrastructure to support housing. Now, that's not going to solve the whole problem, but it's a really big part of it. The second point you make, and the second part of our initiative, again, when I dug into this, I just couldn't believe the scale of this. All the different fees that are levied now for building housing and in this whole area, just staggering. If you add up all the fees, a typical housing unit in California now will have levied on it $100,000, $150,000, sometimes $200,000 of fees when you add it all up. On that, just paid by the developer, by the house builder. In San Francisco, they were charging, if you add it all up, $300,000 per apartment. Not for the apartment building, for each apartment. So of course, they're going to sell for some astronomical price, and regular people can't afford housing. So the second part of our initiative caps fees at a proportion of the construction cost. So there's so much going wrong with the way housing operates. Our initiative addresses two of the most egregious things, and would make a big difference. So I'm going to be yanked off right now. So I have to go and do a radio interview myself. So that's, thank you, Sally. I just want to leave it. So now I'm going to say to you, please go to Cal Homes Now. Cal Homes, CALHOMES now. Cal Homes Now. And sign up to get your petition. We're trying to get this on the ballot. We're trying to get a movement going so that we can actually build things in California once again and make this state golden as we all want it to be. Thank you very much, everyone.